Chapter 12. James. After the board games were over, people went back to their cubicles still wearing the pajamas. Most wore them over their work clothes like me and Alice, but some had gone the extra mile to change in the bathroom. When I left, I saw Alice walking out the door into the shop, still dressed for a slumber party. I appreciated things like that because it was a good plug for my business. If anyone asked why she was so comfortably attired, she might just mention that she had contracted with Party Planner to host events in the middle of the afternoon. You never knew who was listening, and word of mouth was still one of the most powerful advertising methods around. I couldn't get over her reaction to the teddy. It was priceless. If she thought she'd hid her embarrassment, she was sorely mistaken. Everyone in the office had picked up on it immediately, and though they were kind to her face behind her back, there was a little bit of laughter. When she left the room, I made it clear that I wouldn't put up with any derogatory remarks. After she returned to the conference room and beat me at chutes and ladders, the gossip calmed down. My helpers returned, and we cleaned up the board games, removed the snack table, and packed everything back into our truck. I still had a few hours left in the day, so I decided to get some work done. It looked like the 2 weddings were coming along nicely. No more fires to put out yet. Speaking of fires, I checked my list for Alice's activities and saw one of my personal favorites next in line. We were going to have a campout, with marshmallow roasting and spooky stories. Instead of pajamas, this event featured blankets embroidered with the names of all the employees. Everyone would snuggle up beside the roaring flame and get to take their blanket home with them at the end of the day. I tried out this particular activity with children of all ages, and it was usually a hit. Remembering Alice's joy when she beat me earlier that day, I couldn't help but feel like I had lost a round. Sure, it was all fun and games, but she was one up on me, and that wasn't going to cut it. The fire pit was the perfect stage for getting back at her. She was never good with spooky stories, always too frightened to listen. When we were in high school, most of our friends were into scary movies. A favorite activity was driving to the mall on Friday night and buying tickets to the latest Slash Fest. People threw popcorn and laughed at the ladies in micro-bikinis as they ran screaming from serial killers. But Alice wanted none of that. She stayed home every single time, coming up with various excuses as to why she couldn't join us. "My hair is wet," she said once. "My grandmother is in town." My personal favorite was, "I just waxed my legs and I don't want to sit on the movie theater chairs." She finally admitted that she was scared of the movies we liked and that they gave her nightmares. I stopped asking her to join us and even elected to sit a few of them out myself so she didn't feel so bad. It didn't stop me from teasing her, though. I couldn't wait to see her squirm as she tried not to let her employees in on her little secret. High school friends could be relentless about such idiosyncrasies, but employees were just as hard on their supervisors. Everyone, no matter how shy or awkward, has a few stories to tell about their boss. Our next activity was sure to generate some new ones. I worked late that night, cementing a few vendors for the weddings and nudging a few of the more distant projects along. At no point in my entrepreneurial career was I able to just focus on one job at a time. No matter how big or important the current project was, there were always a dozen other clients that needed a little TLC. By 8 o'clock, I was done. It didn't matter that I hadn't finished everything I wanted to. I needed to go home and relax. Maybe get a little shut-eye before hitting the gym early in the morning. If there was one thing my ugly party phase had taught me, it was the benefit of taking care of myself. If I didn't get at least 6 hours of sleep, 3 solid meals, and a workout in each day, I was no good to anyone. I was the last one in the building, so I locked up when I left. The next day rolled around quicker than I expected. I was up at the crack of dawn fixing breakfast before jogging to the gym to lift weights. I walked back home when it was all over, feeling at peace. I really was lucky. Even though my job had me running from one event to the next, working late and never taking a day off, I was in business for myself. I didn't have to answer to anyone else, and Alice was back in my life. It's true, we weren't officially dating, and she snapped at me more often than not, but I deserved it for the way I'd treated her. If I just gave her time to realize that I wasn't going anywhere, she might calm down and let me get close. We arranged to do the fire pit with the spooky stories around 4. That way people could clock out and stay as long as they wanted to. I brought 2 other employees with me to the site, setting up our camping illusion in the courtyard. We were hauling logs for what felt like hours, arranging them in a circle for ambiance. There were dozens of stadium chairs to set up so that people had comfortable seating. I pulled coolers with root beer and water from the back of the truck and sprinkled them around so that folks could help themselves. We needed a table for the blankets, so we pulled out a cheap folding one and covered it with camouflage, stacking the blankets in their plastic bags. I made sure all the names were easily accessible. The last thing I wanted was some kind of bottleneck as people sorted through dozens of open packages. Finally, we had marshmallows and sticks sorted out so that everyone could take a turn at the fire. There were flashlights to give the illusion of darkness and a speaker that attached to my phone so that I could play ambient music. No sooner was the stage set than the doors opened and the employees began filing out. Alice led the group, thrilled to see all our hard work. I grinned back at her, knowing that she wouldn't feel the same way in 15 minutes or so. I had a story up my sleeve that was so scary it would knock the socks off any teenager who thought they were hot stuff. It might even scare a few grown-ups in the process. "Welcome to Camp Pixie Dust," I announced, ushering my participants into the circle. "On your right, you'll see a table with a number of blankets on it. If you find your own, you can bring it with you and find a seat. There's refreshments and s'mores, but the main attraction is the campfire." People laughed and clapped. "This isn't Christmas," one guy said. "I have to disagree," I replied, pointing at him. "We'll all bundle up and hear a good story. Back in the days before there was television and internet, camping was a popular pastime during the Christmas season." "I've never been camping," Marcy said. "You're in for a treat," I told her. "Only the best of the experience here. No shower spiders or clogged toilets." "Ew," Alice scrunched up her nose. "I'm telling it like it is," I laughed. "It feels like a tailgate," someone else observed. I watched as they all sorted through the blankets. One intrepid individual began handing them out, calling names and passing packages down the line. Before long, everyone was holding their own blanket and settling down around the fire. I heard the pops of a dozen soda cans opening. The front row grabbed marshmallow sticks and began toasting. Alice took a seat beside me, having no idea what I had in store for her. I rubbed my hands together, holding them out to the flames for warmth. "What do you think?" "It's wonderful," she replied. "I can almost picture the rest of the campsite. There's an RV over there," she pointed to the parking lot, "and a hammock over there," she pointed to the lamppost. I pulled a flashlight out from behind my back and clicked it on, training it on my chin. "It's time for the best part of a campfire," I cried dramatically, rising to my feet so that everyone could see me. "Spooky stories." Alice screamed in delight, doubling over with laughter. She recovered a moment later, wiping tears from her eyes. Clearly, she didn't think I would be capable of scaring her. Challenge accepted. Throughout the crowd, everyone else made excited noises. Some clapped and some pulled out cell phones to record it. I realized I had just become the main event, and that I'd better do a good job. Otherwise, the entire party was going to fall flat on its face. "Once upon a time," I began, "there was a family who lived in a big house in the country. The father was a mining consultant, and he moved his wife and children from their comfortable home in the suburbs to a rickety old place out in the middle of nowhere. The land was dry and brown. There hadn't been any rain for months." Alice looked up at me with rapt attention, and I narrowed my focus to her. There were dozens of other people around, but she was my target audience. Now, the father wasn't a miner himself, though he had been when he was younger. But after a while, he developed a feel for the land and was able to advise the owners instead of working so hard. His promotion came with a raise, and though he could have used the money to buy a better home, he chose not to. He was a little bit crazy. I crouched down, lowering myself to Alice's level. She tucked her feet under her chair, her eyes wide. I could see I was getting to her, even though the tale hadn't really begun. One day, the family was enjoying their supper when the lights went out. I kept going, winging it. I could see that she didn't like the idea of a crazy man living off the grid, so I pushed that angle. The plot continued to unfold, just as I had rehearsed it. The girls were upstairs in the bedroom, hiding in the closet. I reached the core of the nightmare, that scenario that every horror movie plays off. Two young people hiding out from a killer, waiting breathlessly as the footsteps dragged closer. "Stop!" Alice shot out of her chair, to the surprise of everyone around her. "I give up. I can't take it. And they all lived happily ever after." "That's not the end of the story," I objected. "And the footsteps they heard in the hallway were the police coming to rescue them," she reconstructed the narrative. "And they lived happily ever after." Okay, I laughed, lowering my flashlight. Does anyone else have a story? I have one. Craig from sales raised his hand. I passed the magic wand over to the next man and took a seat beside Alice. After being up on stage for so long, I took a moment to enjoy watching someone else take the spotlight. But just as Craig began to speak, dark clouds rolled in. People watched in delight as the sun was blocked out, surrounded by the beginnings of a storm. I cut Craig off, standing up to bring the event to a close. Let's all get to our cars before it starts to rain, I said. Remember to take your blankets with you. The employees grumbled, not wanting the event to be over. But as soon as the first fat drops hit their shoulders, they hustled away, laughing and chatting as they went. That left me and my crew cleaning up as fast as we could. We managed to haul all the chairs and logs back into the truck in half the time it took us to unload them. I was soaked when it was all over, but it was worth it. The heavens had impeccable timing when it came to my business. We got to enjoy at least an hour of good fun before the rain began, and I couldn't have paid for better ambiance. You guys go ahead, I yelled to my staff. I'm going to check on Alice. They nodded and ducked into the truck's cab, pulling away as the sky opened up and sheets of liquid poured down. I held my hands over my head to shield myself, though it didn't work very well. Pulling the staff door open, I jumped inside, chilled instantly by the change in temperature. Even though the heat was on in the building, wet fabric clung to my chest and legs, making me uncomfortable. Alice? I asked. There was no one else in the office, but I was pretty sure that the store was still open. Walking past the cubicles, I poked my head in through the back, scoping out the customers. Only one person remained getting their packages ready to mail. The rest of the room was empty, giving the seasoned workers a break. Hey there! Charlie waved at me, and I waved back. Alice wasn't anywhere in sight, so I closed the door and walked back across the room. Mounting the stairs, I knew I would find her in her office. She was probably still working, even though the rest of her staff had gone home. Like me, she put her heart and soul into her business. Knocking on the door, I was rewarded with a quick, "Come in!" I stepped inside, noting that she was, in fact, behind her desk. You look drenched, she said. It's raining out, I observed. Is everyone else gone? She asked. Yeah, I replied. A few people left in the shop, but the rest of the building is empty. I have to go up to the 5th floor, she said, getting to her feet. Why? I asked. Someone complained about the fire this afternoon, she replied. You can come with me to explain. Is anyone still working up there? I was surprised. I don't know, she responded. I think so. I just got the email. I'm sorry. I stood back to let her out of the office, following her around the mezzanine to the elevators. I should have cleared it with the rest of your building. You didn't know, she said easily. Touching my shoulder, her fingertips came away wet. You look so cold. I'm freezing, I replied. You didn't bring a blanket for yourself? No, I replied. It's fine. I'll dry off. I wish I had some clothes to offer you, she admitted. I'll be fine, I repeated myself, stepping onto the elevator when the doors opened. We no sooner boarded the car than the electricity flashed off. The door snicked shut, locking us in total darkness. I pushed the button, but it didn't do any good. Pulling my phone out, I switched on the flashlight app. Alice looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. It's going to be okay, I said gently. She stepped past me, ignoring my consolation. Stabbing a finger into one button after another, she tried them all. When they all failed to light up, she panicked. Pounding on the door, she began to yell, Help! Just give it a moment, I suggested. Help! She continued, beating against the metal to no avail. Alice, I said firmly, pulling her away from the edge. What? She stammered. It's not opening. Give it a minute, I said again. I'm sure the lights will come back on. She looked up at me, and in the glare of the phone, I could see she was truly worried. I put the phone in my back pocket where it could still provide some illumination, and wrapped my arms around her. It wasn't ideal since my chest was wet, but the skin beneath was hot with desire. She felt like a tiny bird aching to break free. There wasn't anywhere for her to go and nothing to do except worry. I wanted to take that away from her, to comfort her in her time of need. She shivered at first, thrown off by my icy exterior, but soon the space between us sizzled and she relaxed her shoulders. I couldn't help myself. I knew that she needed me to be strong, but the only thing I felt was lust. We were trapped in an elevator, and though I insisted that it would be only for a moment, my body told me otherwise. Without the benefit of forethought, I lowered my lips to hers, capturing all the manic energy surrounding her. She didn't fight it. She didn't even question my arousal. Just as I expected, she opened up to me, her tongue a palette of sensation. Closing my eyes, I gave myself over to the experience. She was everything I'd imagined her to be, and 1,000 times more delicious than I hoped. Time seemed to stop, and the walls of the elevator faded away. We could have been on a cruise ship or in a hotel room in Paris for all I cared. The effect would have been the same. I felt a reciprocal rising in her chest, as if she was as swept away by the kiss as I was. Sliding my hands down her arms, I cupped her elbows, easing her deeper into the embrace. She returned the favor by pressing her chest against mine, even though it was damp. I heard the click of the lights coming back on an instant before she broke away. The elevator doors slid open, releasing us from our confinement. Alice stepped back, looking astonished and disappointed. It wasn't the reaction I was hoping for, and the storm in her eyes punched me right in the gut. "I'm sorry," she whispered before turning tail and fleeing the scene. I watched helplessly as she circled the mezzanine back to her office. Slamming the door behind her, she didn't even wait to see whether I was following. I'd been so sure she wanted me. Her body language was unmistakable. It was obviously too soon to brush our past aside, and even though my entire being wanted to go to her, I refrained. I had to pass by her office to reach the stairs, and I stopped to listen outside her door. Silence was the only thing that greeted my ears. No sobbing or yelling broadcast her feelings. I raised a hand to knock, but thought better of it. No good could come from interrupting her self-imposed exile. With a heavy sigh, I left the building and walked back to my car, not even caring about the rain.